Hello there, it's Chris again. This message is going out to all those CBE folks. Have you recognized this yet? Competency-based education. I'm going to do just a fairly brief little rundown on how you can put together what this is a DACUM, or a course profile. DACUM, of course, stands for Design a Curriculum. And we'll talk for a few minutes just about some of the tricks and techniques. So make sure you go there. I'm wearing my Alcatraz hat today in case many of you feel like you're chained in front of your computers. Okay, that's a sick joke. Let's move on. Let's take a look at the DACUM. Over here on the left-hand column, we have the little triangles which symbolize goals. Now the goals, of course, are the larger, more amorphous, less definable things that you come up with. You could also think of them as, when you're first designing this, as topics or various topic areas. You stick a goal in there and eventually you'll want to put a verb on it too. And just a foreshadowing, you want to have a verb of high enough complexity so that your objective verbs are not higher in complexity, cognitive complexity, than your goal verb. Because if that's the case, you have a misalignment. And we'll talk more about that later. Of course, once you have your goals, 4 to 7 goals, that's about all you need for a course. Then you're looking at setting up your objectives. Now there's 2 ways in the manual where it describes 2 ways to go about this. The first way is to come up with brainstorm goals, and you can start with topics, morph them into goals, and then move from each goal to the logical objectives or performances that would go into achieving that goal. The other way is to start with just all the student performances, all the knowing, being, and doing you can think of that would go into that particular topic. Then put those in some sort of an order and come up with a goal that would make sense considering the objectives. So there's 2 ways to look at that, and they're both detailed quite nicely in your manual. So once you have the goal, for example, and you start with your objectives and you start filling those in. So let's just go a little bit deeper here. That's goals, okay? And the note there is to make sure that you use the numbering system. So the goals are letters, actually, and each objective would be the number 1, 2, 3. So goal A would be A, and the objective 1, A1, and so on, so that we can figure out what we're looking at in your assignments. So here's a goal: carry out first aid skills. Notice it's fairly generic as far as the verb goes, but that will cover a lot of objectives. Objectives, there's the definition. You can read it. I'm not going to read it to you. I think we've already established that we know about objectives. Okay, perform CPR, and think simple, think active as far as verbs go. All right. Now, this one just talks about all the confusion in the literature that's out there, all the synonyms that really aren't synonyms for objectives, outcomes. I was looking at a YouTube today where somebody said outcomes-based objectives, which really confused the issue. Now, we talk about objectives when we talk about CBE. We talk about outcomes when we talk about OBE, or outcomes-based. Objectives are more specific, they're more discrete. Outcomes are bigger, hairier, and they try to capture things that are a little bit more complex. Okay, here's what your desk should look like when you finish this process. And that guy has sort of a crazy gleam in his eye, which again refers back to Alcatraz, and that's why I'm wearing that hat today. But that won't happen to you, will it? It's happened to me several times over the course of my career. All right, creating performance objectives. So let's say we've got our DACUM done. We've got our objectives in there. We have verbs attached to them. The next step in the assignment is to create 10 performance objectives. Well, how do we do that? Okay. First of all, we start with a clearly defined objective. You can read that. These are the reasons why we have objectives. Okay, fairly straightforward. Now, 3 components. We start with the performance, what is expected to be done. We add a condition or set of conditions, in other words, how the performance is to be done. And then we add some criteria or standards. How will the learner must perform? Oh, not performer. There's a mistake on the slide. Sorry about that, folks. So let's take a look. Learner-centered, appropriate in scale and scope, clear and simple, and they have those three things. The performance, which is an active verb like build a birdhouse. The conditions, given a set of tools, standing in the howling rain on the side of a mountain, the student will be able to build a birdhouse according to the blueprint specifications. Okay, here's an example for you. Given the workflow diagram of a good-sized publishing company, the student will be able to, or the student will identify at least 3 departments within the company. Well, it seems pretty straightforward that the performances the student will identify. Now that's a fairly low-level verb, isn't it? So that might come at the beginning of your set of objectives. The condition here is given the workflow diagram of a good-sized publishing company. So we hand that to the student. We ask them to identify what? At least 3 departments within the company. So there's 2 criteria there. You can see how this leads nicely to assessment. A well-written performance objective will let you know how you should assess that person, what you should assess them on, and the conditions under which they should be doing that performance. Okay? Let me just do one more. After looking at a magazine, the student will describe 3 editorial objectives of the publication. Okay, so describe editorial objectives. That's the performance, isn't it? I guess you could say describe objectives is the root. Editorial might be a criteria as well. The conditions are after looking at a magazine, and the criteria would be 3, meaning not 2, not 1, editorial, and of that publication as opposed to something else. So you CBE folks, what you're doing first of all is coming up with a DACM or a profile, and when you get a draft, you can send it out, post it, and have some of your colleagues in your CBE group comment on it, and constructive comments. I'd like to ask questions. I'm wondering about this. I'm wondering about that. Then when you get your feedback, you can work on your document more. When you're happy with it, send it to me and I'll give you some feedback. Then the other aspect of the CBE assignment is to develop 10 performance objectives. So take a look in the manual, take a look at this if you have enough guts to look at it again, and best of luck with this whole thing. I will talk to you soon. Please remember, you can email me at any time with any kind of questions. That's all for now. From Alcatraz. Bye-bye.